because of the Civil War. About 6 weeks after we left, poachers came to this area where we worked in the national park, and they killed 26 elephants all at once. They came to this really beautiful special clearing, this natural clearing in the woods, gunned down 26 elephants, sliced off their ivory, and left the elephants for dead. And that was really shocking. I'm just in the zone. I think really the only times I really like feel, what they call flow, that creative flow, when I'm taking photos in a sort of intense situation where I kind of forget about my own self. And hopefully none of my professors are watching this.
Halo, selamat datang di Uncensored with Andini Effendi. Dan episode kali ini kita menghadirkan Laurel Chor, seorang freelance fotografer dan filmmaker yang punya banyak sekali cerita dari zona konflik, konservasi sampai sekarang ini dia sedang kuliah dan ternyata juga masih aja liputan di perang Ukraine. Jadi perbincangannya menarik sekali. Hi Laurel, so good to finally meet you.
It's good to finally meet you too. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Thank you so much for even wanting to join us, for sharing your stories. You have a lot of stories to tell us.
Thanks. It's my honor.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with like a little bit of your background. So you were born on January 8th. You're going to be 33 this year, or you're already 33 this year, right?
Already 33.
Already.
Yeah.
So you're Capricorn. You know what? I'm actually very much connected to Capricorn as a Saggy. So there you go.
Oh, really? Oh, I see. My sister's a Sagittarius.
There you go. There you go. So how many siblings do you have?
Exactly. I have a younger brother and an older sister. So I'm in the middle.
Okay. A middle child. And then you were born in Canada, but your parents are from Hong Kong.
Exactly. I was born in Canada. My parents had immigrated from Hong Kong, and then we moved back to Hong Kong. So I grew up in Hong Kong.
Okay. So you moved back when you were 5, was it?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then you were there until what age in Hong Kong?
So we were there. We were there until I left for university. Except for there's a 2-year period when we lived in Taiwan as well. So a bit all over the place.
Oh, wow. So you're Hong Kong Canadian. That's you.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you went to school in Hong Kong, and then you said you spent some time in Taiwan. And then for college, you went to Georgetown. Right? And
exactly.
You were studying international health with a minor of international development. So what was the reasoning behind that?
I think at the time when I left high school, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to help people. I wanted to travel. And, I had this dream of working for Doctors Without Borders, doing things like that. And actually in between high school and university, I took a gap year. I was very lucky to have the chance to travel and volunteer straight out of high school. And my ideas sort of changed. And by the time I got to university, I didn't want to be a doctor anymore, but I stuck with the degree. But I really loved the degree. I learned a lot. My university, Georgetown, is in Washington, D.C. So it's sort of the best place for you to learn about international organizations, about government, about policy. So it was a really formative experience for me.
Yeah. And then where did you travel in that gap year period?
I spent 4 months in South America and 5 months in Africa, sort of backpacking around all over.
Like all over where? We're in South America. We're in Africa.
Let's see. I started in Guatemala. I was in Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. And then in Africa, I was in Malawi, South Africa, Swaziland, Namibia, Botswana, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, did I say that already? And Mozambique.
Wow. Were you there by yourself or with like a group of friends?
Sometimes I was by myself. Sometimes I would join I would, volunteer. So I'd be sort of slotted into an organization with the homestay, or sometimes I would do tour groups. So a bit of everything. Yeah.
Wow. So you're this adventurous soul. Where does it come from? Is it from parents? Is there like anyone from the family sort of like inspired you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, both my parents like to travel. I think my mom, especially, she really loves to travel. So I grew up already, with quite an international upbringing from Canada and Hong Kong and Taiwan, and traveling around the region and Asia, especially. So I grew up used to traveling and also being exposed to people from all over the world. In Hong Kong, it's a very international city. It's kind of just normal to be surrounded by people who are different from you. But the adventurous side, I'm not sure. I think it comes from my mom's side. I have an uncle. His name is Uncle Cookie. He's very adventurous and he's a lot of fun. And I think I would like to think it comes from him.
Okay. Well, what does your parent do for a living?
So my dad is retired. He was a businessman who worked in different industries, from cosmetics to cigarettes, actually. Okay. And he also ran our family sauce company. My grandfather founded a sauce company in 1938 in Hong Kong. And it's a very small boutique sauce company. It's not like anything major, but it's, been almost 100 years now. And
sauce meaning like a sauce for cooking sauce?
Yeah, exactly. Like chili sauce, oyster sauce, black bean chili sauce. And my mom was a homemaker growing up, a stay-at-home mom.
Wow. So no one from your family has a journalism or is a journalist?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm first generation college graduate. My parents didn't go to college. My grandparents certainly didn't. So it's no one from that world at all. It never even crossed my mind to be a journalist. I think I didn't know any. I don't know how you became one.
Right.
I kind of thought you either became like a doctor, lawyer, or a business person, whatever that meant.
That's the classic ones, right? Being a journalist is like anti-mainstream in a way.
Yeah. And it's not even all that wild, is it?
Right. Okay, so you always been like a fan of photography, or at least you love to take photos since you were a teenager. So how did that come about?
I don't know. I remember there was one summer where I was really bored and I was just taking photos around the house with like my little point and shoot, just really random photos of like flowers and like bugs, like nothing all that interesting. And that kind of grew into a love of just taking photos in general. I took a photography class, 2 photography classes in high school. The first one was old school with a dark room and everything, film photography. And then I think on school trips, I started taking photos like of what we were doing. And then on my gap year, especially, I was taking a lot of photos. And that's how my love for photos sort of blossomed. It was kind of just snapshots and like really just, I guess, like random things and travel photography or an attempt at it. And I think, a lot of photographers sort of dream of being photojournalists or even like conflict photographers, but I didn't know how one became that, really. So I don't think I ever really thought of it as an option. And, so I picked one of the 3, which is doctor.
Wow.
And thought I'd become that. But yeah, not a doctor.
Wow. So you still collect the photos from your gap year travel in South America and Africa. You still have it now?
Yeah, I mean, they're on a hard drive, I don't think I've ever looked at them again. I'm pretty sure they're all terrible, but it would certainly be a trip down memory lane. Yeah, I think it's hard to look back at your old photos and then you can at least appreciate how far you've come, but there's certainly nothing that would win any awards today.
But it sure is brought you to where you are today. But before we reach today, so you did, like after you graduate from college, and then you spent some time in the Central African Republic, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So near the end of university, I was kind of like, like before I even got to university, I decided I want to be a doctor. And then by the end of university, I'm like, do I really want to go into public health? It was always my dream to work with animals, to work in the jungle, to follow in the footsteps of my hero, Jane Goodall. And I was like, you know what? Like, why not? I'm going to try. So my very last semester of university, I at a time when most people are just sort of slacking off, I added extra classes into my schedule, and I took animal behavior and conservation biology. And when I graduated, over the summer, I had a summer job as a fact checker at National Geographic, actually, since they're headquartered in DC. And I applied to every single entry level primatology job I could find, for the study of primates, just like Jane Goodall. And only one position got back to me. And they were actually interested in me because of my degree in international health and my language skills. So they accepted me as a volunteer. I went to the Central African Republic. I was supposed to stay for a year, ended up staying for just under 6 months. Sadly, a civil war broke out. To this day, the country is still in turmoil, and all of the foreign staff were evacuated from this project. This was back in 2013.
Oh, wow. So you basically played with gorillas there during that volunteering time.
You're not supposed to touch them, obviously.
Yeah.
But
interacting.
Look, observing.
Okay.
This was a gorilla habituation program. And the idea is to keep gorillas, or to make gorillas used to human presence, or to keep them used to human presence. So there's two, I think right now, at least at the time when I was there are two gorilla families. One was already habituated, meaning they're used to people, and there's one that wasn't yet. And the reason why you need gorillas used to people is so that you can see them, so you can create forests there, and so you can observe their behavior for scientific purposes as well. And of course, since they didn't have GPS trackers on them, so you'd have to physically have someone there from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed to know where they are every day. So it was my job just to be one of those teams, one of those people who just follow them around every day. We did it in 2 shifts at the time. But yeah, I followed gorillas around for months.
That should be interesting. Wow. Okay. So what went through your parents' mind when you finished international health from Georgetown, and then you ended up basically observing gorillas in Central African Republic?
Yeah. I think, my parents always knew I was adventurous and liked doing things like that. So I think to them, this was probably just an extension of, it was kind of on par for me, maybe a little bit more out there, but I guess at that point have a college degree now. But there were a few moments where it was a little bit dicey, and I know they were worried. And to this day, to be honest, I don't know if I've ever been in a situation that at least they've known about where they've been more worried. So I think that kind of set the bar. And ever since, if it's not as bad as the time she was in the CAR when she was 22, it can't be that bad.
Nothing can beat a 22-year-old girl in Central African Republic.
Yeah.
So tell us about after that volunteer period, and then you became a journalist and you entered journalism. So what was the story? Where did you first work?
So while I was in the CAR, I sort of was blogging, taking photos and writing about my experience. And, to be honest, I found the work pretty boring. My experience in the CR changed my life to this day. It's probably one of the most important and significant experiences in my life, and I'll never forget it. And I owe the country and the people there and the wildlife there so much. And I really do hope to go back one day soon. But the work itself, just following gorillas around, I found really, really boring. I think there were a lot of factors. I wasn't doing, proper research. I wasn't like, I was just following them around so that we would know where they were. Like that was kind of boring. And so I was kind of like, okay, so I've tried the animal thing and I'm not loving it. But I do love taking photos of them. And I love telling people about where I am, because where I am is so, so, so special. There's gorillas, there's elephants in this country that most people where I'm from hadn't heard of. And it needs to be protected. And so, that's what I really loved about being there was taking photos and writing about it. And then so when we were evacuated because of the Civil War, about 6 weeks after we left, poachers came to this area where we worked in the national park, and they killed 26 elephants all at once. They came to this really beautiful special clearing, this natural clearing in the woods, gunned down 26 elephants, sliced off their ivory, and left the elephants for dead. And that was really shocking and devastating. And at this point I was back in Hong Kong, and that's when I started learning about the ivory trade, about how, the Hong Kong had at the time, and probably still does, the largest legal ivory market in the world. It's been it's being phased out, or maybe by now it's phased out successfully. But, Hong Kong was a major trading hub for ivory. And I realized, man, like I thought I had gone as far away as possible from home. And I kind of had, right? A jungle in Southwestern Central African Republic. And still my city was having probably a very direct impact on wildlife and people in the Central African Republic, because also the proceeds from those ivory sales were probably going to fund armed conflicts, which we know it's done in with Al-Shabaab in Eastern Africa, for example. So it really opened my eyes to how, there isn't, in our interconnected globalized world, there isn't really, ideas of pristine nature that doesn't have to do with us anymore. We're all interdependent on each other. We all affect each other. We're all consumers connected to this global economy, and our actions make a difference. So I kind of realized, like, I was probably the only person in Hong Kong who had ever been there. And it felt like I really had a responsibility as someone who had just been there, who has been there at all, is in Hong Kong now, with this very real and urgent problem, 26 elephants killed at once. And it felt like it was on me to sort of show people what I had seen and speak up for it. So that's when I started realizing, like, the impact that I can have, as a unqualified, untrained volunteer. Could I really have that much of an impact following gorillas around? Frankly, no. But as a Hong Konger who had been there, had taken photos, can tell stories about what I saw and tell people what had happened, it felt like that was the best use of my experience. And that's when I started being, trying to use my photography and my writing and getting more informed about different wildlife trade issues. Ended up working on a documentary about the ivory trade. And then,
this was when you already become a journalist doing this documentary.
Well, that was sort of my first big project, I guess.
Okay.
This other director was looking for someone to help with this documentary, and I came on. It was about the ivory trade. And then I, found an internship at a magazine at Time Out, Hong Kong. I want to take photos, but I didn't know how one became a photographer, a photojournalist. I was like, well, I should probably find some sort of with some sort of media. And it was a writing internship for arts and culture, which I still don't know anything about, but they took me and I found opportunities to take photos. So I learned how to write there. I got some photos in. It was a really great internship experience. And then from there, I went to a journalism conference. I learned about this media company called Coconuts.
Mm-hmm.
I loved what they were doing, and then spoke to them. They happened to be hiring in Hong Kong, and I ended up, there was a writing test. And I wrote this long, in-depth multimedia piece with photos about the local dodgeball scene in Hong Kong, because it's like a court site. and then I got a job there and was there for 2 years. So that was really my first real job and my first journalism job. And
Wow.
I loved working there.
Wow. So you were there as a reporter or doing also photo?
I was associate editor. So I was a reporter. I was writing.
Yeah.
And then, my bosses gave me a lot of freedom, and they let me take photos. It was an asset for them. They let me make videos. So I started to make videos. They let me host. So I started being in front of the camera too. So I did a bit of everything, which really allowed me to grow and experiment and try different things and tell stories that I really cared about. So it was a great experience.
And then after 2 years, was it with Coconut?
Yeah.
And then you joined Vice News.
I did.
My favorite. That is like my favorite news.
Still a big fan of Vice. I still work with them sometimes. So I came on as a producer for Vice News Tonight on HBO at the time. It was a brand new show, and they were launching on HBO. It was a nightly news show on HBO, and I was the only person actually in Asia for the show. So I was producing segments all over Asia for the show, which was a lot of fun. It was a huge learning curve. It was very challenging at first, but once I got the hang of it, it was super cool. I got to travel all over Asia, telling all sorts of stories, working with really cool people. It was a fantastic, very intense experience as well.
How long were you with Vice for?
Just over 2 years. And then I think at one point it just felt like if I stayed on, I would sort of just get a bit complacent. It was a really cool job, but I wanted to do more. And it felt like I had to be on my own in order to be able to do that. I missed taking photos. I missed writing. I missed hosting. Like there were all these things that I couldn't do at Vice because I was so specialized in producing. And so I went freelance, and I guess the rest is history. I've been freelance ever since. So it's been more than 4 years that I've been freelance.
Wow, freelance journalist. So that concept alone, in Indonesia at least, is just very uncommon. Okay, because you got to be associated to a company, to a network, right? But how is it with you? And then why did you take a leap of being an independent journalist?
Yeah. I mean, I think freelance, journalism in general is not an easy industry to be in. It's not the healthiest industry. It's not the most profitable industry. And freelance journalism, you sort of get like the dregs of that. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. I'm not going to pretend that everyone starts off with on the same foot. Like journalism, unfortunately, in general, does have a diversity and inclusion problem, even at the regional level, right? And certainly for freelance journalism, you do tend to have people who are more likely to have social safety nets of some sort of fallback they can rely on. These are not, you don't go into freelance journalism if you have to like feed 10 mouths, right? But for me, I think it was just good timing. I think it felt like, I'd worked all over Asia, both for regional publications and for international publications. I'd really built a network. I had, produced work I was really proud of. I had a portfolio, and it felt like I was in a good place to make the leap and have more freedom to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. And mostly it was really more photography. I think that was what I was missing the most. Like, I realized that, I'd gone so far as a video producer when I actually never really had interest in video. Here I was producing pieces for Vice News on HBO. I was producing entire episodes. This is the most Emmy-winning nightly newscast. And I was like, wow, like when I just try hard and I don't care about the outcome, I can go really hard. So why haven't I tried with photography, the medium that I really care about?
Wow.
And I think for me, it kind of felt like it was now or never. So I took the leap, and, it was a bit of flailing for a few months, just like building a network, building up projects, taking any work I could, and then realizing like, why did I take that? Like, I didn't even enjoy that. It wasn't even that much money. Eventually, in Hong Kong, there was a big news events. There were big protests in Hong Kong, and the whole world's eyes were on Hong Kong. And I was a freelancer who spoke the local language, was from Hong Kong, had the portfolio to back my work. And from then on, things really accelerated, and I was able to suddenly work for a ton of clients all over the world. And I've been able to build on that network ever since.
Wow. So you are heavily focusing or only focusing on photo or videographer, right?
I mean, I write, I take photos, I produce video, I host video. Last year I made a podcast. So really anything. Like for me, it's personally, like I feel most at home in photo, but for me, it's all about the story, like whatever it takes to tell story justice. And there's different audiences you can reach with different mediums. I get bored easily, so it's actually good for me to do a bit of everything all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not like a master at any of these, but like, a jack of all of them. So
wow. So you're all in. Like literally you do everything that a team can do. So what is it about a camera that makes you feel alive when you're behind it?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think, my mind tends to be all over the place in general. I have ADHD, diagnosed, medicated. And it's hard for me to be in the moment sometimes, I think, or it definitely used to be harder. And I think when I'm behind the camera, it just gives me a tool or an excuse to sort of really immerse myself into the moment and into the environment and try to disappear and just feel what's happening around me and trying to capture that. And, the more you hone your skill and your eye, the more natural it becomes. And I think especially with photojournalism, it's often, at least the topics I cover, it's often intense, it's fast paced, there's a lot going on. And I'm just in the zone. I think really the only times I really like feel, what they call flow, that creative flow, when I'm taking photos in a sort of intense situation where I kind of forget about my own self and I'm just in the moment. And I think I just love capturing moments. I think part of it, is like an anxiety of like, I need to capture this, like this is happening. I need to freeze it. I need to document it. And I think, I'm a sensitive, empathetic person. And I think that's what I'm trying to capture is like the emotions and the feelings, the sense of the mood of any given moment.
Oh, wow. And then, so we got to know each other through a mutual friend whom you went to Rwanda together. And you were also doing like photojournalism, or was it more videographer? I forgot.
I was taking photos myself and I was producing the video. So I hired a videographer to come along as well.
Wow.
She's great.
So you finally came back to your I don't know, your second love or first love, which is doing like wildlife.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So, I was in Rwanda with our friend Rajiv, African Parks, this big organization, that basically runs national parks, in partnership with governments across Africa. They, have been, they selected 8 rangers to run in the London Marathon next month. And they were in Rwanda, training for that. So I got to document that, which was really special.
That is very special. Not only you get to see like the gorillas, but you see like the park rangers running in Rwanda for training for London Marathon.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, so the park they were training in, there's no gorillas. There are gorillas in Rwanda. Rajiv did see them before he came to Akagera, the park. I didn't see them this time, but the first time I saw gorillas was in Rwanda. So it's a very special country indeed with amazing wildlife.
So, and then you got accepted to Oxford for your master's degree. What
So
is
in
yeah?
20, yeah.
What is
So
your major again, and when was it?
So it's a master's in biodiversity conservation and management.
Ooh.
And I actually first got in, I think in 2019, but I ended up deferring because I was so busy working. So, and then I deferred to the next year, and COVID happened, and I was like, and I needed a break. I was so burnt out. So I was like, cool, like perfect timing. Like I'll go to school. Like what better use of of COVID, and like, it was a good excuse for me to just, I wanted to like escape from the world and just learn. So I went to the UK in October 2020 in the middle of COVID. And it's a 2-year master's. Unfortunately, I had to take last year off because I was so busy working again. So this year, fingers extra crossed. I mean, really, it's up to me. I really need to finish it this year. So I'll be turning in my dissertation in a few months, and I will close that chapter.
You will. Before we get into your dissertation, I want to talk about what did you do last year in order for you to push this another year at Oxford. So you basically doing a documentary in Ukraine during the war. So you were there for how long, and then what story did you cover?
So the war broke out, in late February last year, and I went pretty soon after with the team of fellow journalists and security people, and we wanted to go. As freelance journalists, of course, like when something like that happens, you want to go and document it, witness it, and we were able to, make work together that we're really proud of. We filmed a short documentary in the liberated areas around Kyiv after Russian forces had pulled out from there. We made a podcast. And then we went back again. And this time we decided to start filming our own independent feature-length documentary, which we're still filming to this day. So in 2022, I spent a total of about 5 months in Ukraine. I go in and out. And then I just recently got back from 5 weeks there. And I'll be hopefully going back next month.
Wow. And then you are the camera person for this, yeah?
Right. So it's basically a team of 3 people on the ground. It's me and my friend Arman, who actually used to live in Indonesia. We are co-directors. We're both directing, and we're both behind the camera. He's the director of photography. He's the one who really specializes in videography, but I shoot as well. And then we have a local producer who also sometimes shoots. But at this point, we're following 3 different people in Eastern Ukraine over time, and we want to film with them as much as possible. So Armin and I kind of take turns going into Ukraine. When he's there, he films. When I'm there, I film.
Wow. So it's basically Ukraine is not your first conflict zone because you were in Africa during that civil war. So, but and then I follow your Instagram, so I kind of see like what you saw, throughout the trip. But like, share with us, like with your own eyes, what is exactly happening?
It's been over a year now, so things have changed and evolved over time. The war, just despite, I think, the feeling that many people abroad have, because this is not in the news as much anymore, it's still very much raging. It's taking a lot of casualties on both sides. A lot of soldiers are dying on both sides every day. The war right now is in a particularly nasty phase, with both sides fighting over a key city in the east. And there are still occasionally strikes on civilian populations across the country. So, the war is still going. It's awful. It's Ukraine at this point, it's been over a year, so it's hard for them to keep up. And, there's always this fear for them that outside support is waning. Thankfully for Ukraine, Western military aid is still continuing. But I think it's hard to explain, right? And on one hand, you have the front, you have the war along this multi-1,000-kilometer front where things are pretty grim for a lot of people, including the soldiers. But then it's a very big country, So in Kyiv, like at this point, they've just pushed the curfew back an hour. I think now it's midnight, and that was big news because, you know, you can stay out an hour later, and that makes a big difference, right? So, I mean, in Kyiv, pretty much since a few months into the war, you can go to restaurants, you can go to bars, you can go to the movies, you can go to the gym. Everything's functioning as normal. The last statistics I checked, the economy had shrunk by 30%, which is of course a lot, but it also means like that a lot of the economy is still functioning. People got to live, people got to work, people got to eat, people got to go to school. So life still, people are trying their best to continue, all the while this war still rages, mostly on the Eastern Front.
Oh, wow. And then you're following people, basically normal civilians, right? And then what are you trying to convey from their stories to the audience?
So we're following, there's three characters. One is a single mother. She's 31, who she has a young son who's a ballroom dancer. He's great. He's 11. And she, before the war, she was like an accountant or something. And she now, when the war started, she started volunteering, and she started evacuating civilians from the front lines, like very, very front lines, to safety out west. Because oftentimes, you know, the front line shifts, or the, you know, villagers or towns find themselves caught very close to the fighting, and they need to get out. And often, you know, people wait to the last minute. Unfortunately, people want to stay home as long as they can, right? So over time, you know, we've filmed her, how her volunteering has evolved. Before, she was part of a team. Now she's running her own team. She's getting closer and closer to the front line. She's starting to get recognized for her work. She's doing incredible, life-saving, very dangerous work. So we've been following her story. Another one is a fire inspector in the city of Bakhmut. You might have heard in the news, Bakhmut is the city that they're fighting for very fiercely right now in the east. He's from there. He's, you know, born and raised in Bakhmut. He loves that town, and he's such a figure of reassurance and authority. He's only 32. He just turned 32. He had to send his family out west. He has a young daughter. His wife just gave birth to a young son 2 months ago. And, you know, he's juggling all this and trying to save the people of his city, all while his city is crumbling around him. And now, you know, they've been pulled out of Bakhmut, so he's in the next town over. And the third person is a Ukrainian journalist who's been covering the conflict since 2014. And so we're following their lives very intimately, you know, from the frontline stuff to the birthday parties. You know, we spent the fire inspector's birthday with him in a far western town where he got to spend it with his family and his newborn baby. They went to a thermal spring resort. So there's things like that happening that we're also capturing. And our aim with this is to show how war, firstly, affects people, to show, you know, not just them as victims, which is how the media traditionally has portrayed victims of war, but to show how people, regular people, you know, take control of their lives, even when it feels like their destiny is out of their hands, how they empower themselves, how they make and find meaning, and how, you know, there's still joy, moments of joy that they find, how there's still humanity. My co-director, Arman, he is from Bosnia himself. He was a refugee of the war when he was very young from Bosnia, and moved to America when he was 6. So for him, he has a very personal experience with what it's like to have your life completely turned upside down by war, your whole community. And, you know, I don't want to speak for him, but I know for him, as he grew up seeing how victims of, or, you know, people are portrayed as victims of war, how they're helpless. And he wanted to sort of spin that on its head and show how people really can find agency and ownership of their lives, even in these terrible situations.
Right. I guess it's not only for Arman. I guess it's also affecting you, right? As someone on the ground and covering the story. So I know we spoke earlier that you love like capturing emotions of real people, the real stories, right? Is that why you become a journalist, I guess? Is that your purpose in this field?
I think it definitely wasn't my intention. That wasn't what, you know, I didn't start off with a mission statement for sure. And I think I really didn't even understand my strengths and what I brought to the table and what I bring to the table that might be different than others until honestly, probably the last couple years. And, that takes like very intentional reflection. And I've realized that I think that is my strength. Like I mentioned, I think I'm quite empathetic and sensitive, and that's what speaks to me when I'm reading or learning about issues around the world, how it affects people. And I think it doesn't feel real till you get a sense of how they feel, right? And that's what I strive to do is or at least I think that's what I realize I strive to do. I'm trying to capture those feelings in the hopes that someone on the other side of the world might understand how that person feels in a situation that they might never face or could never imagine. And, when you have that empathy, I think that's when you can have real solidarity. That's when you can have real motivation to change your behavior or to do something about anything. So that's what I hope to achieve with my work. I think we're all subject to forces beyond our control. My parents were immigrants, my grandparents were refugees. I am from a former British colony, that's had its own political turmoil, and all these things are beyond our control and it affects everything about us. But at the end of the day, we're all people and we all have to make the best of it. And I think we'll have the best shot of solving all of our problems if we work together and had more empathy for each other.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, maybe you'll know better about this than me, but I don't see a lot of female Asian journalists, right, working in our field with specialties like you, because you do like camera, you do reporting, you do hosting as well, you produce, and then you go to like, the places that most of the people maybe they decided not to go, right? Is that something that crossed your mind, that you are like different, you're extraordinary, I feel?
Yeah. I think oftentimes it's easy to forget, which I think is like privilege in itself to, growing up or being at a point where I'm confident enough that I'm not just constantly thinking about how people perceive me. But then sometimes I like remember, I'm like, oh yeah, like they must be wondering why I'm here, like, oh yeah, like I don't look like anyone else here. Like I have not seen a person of color in the last week, and I'm probably the only one for 100 miles. I'm probably the only woman for the next 2 miles. Like, so it's it is unusual. Thankfully, things are changing. There are definitely there's a lot of women journalists in Ukraine. There's not enough, but there's a significant number. There are Asian journalists in Ukraine, or at least, Asian background journalists. There's like a handful of Hong Kong photojournalists for some reason. But all in all, very much not the norm, which has its pros and cons. It's, I think, being different and going places where people aren't willing to go or aren't able to go, I also see that as a strength. I think, just by virtue of being different, I have a different perspective. I have a different eye. I see the world differently. And I think in places where there's not a lot of people going and all the people are going are kind of the same, then that it means I hope that I can have an even bigger impact.
So what did you learn about yourself after experiencing everything that you experience on the ground?
Good question. I think, realizing that emotions are sort of my strength, because I never thought of myself as an emotional person, and I don't think anyone would actually describe me as such. Like I'm not exactly like an easy crier, and I don't get super emotional. I'm generally pretty chill and pretty calm. But I think I've realized, especially in the context of Ukraine, where I am very different, and I've been very aware of how I'm seen differently and how people react to me differently. I think I actually took this for granted, but people open up to me in ways that they don't necessarily with other people. And I think it's because I'm willing to be vulnerable. And I think I like to think it comes from a genuine place. And I think that helps to open other people up. And I never really realized that was not the case for everyone. But, so Armand, my co-director, we always joke that we make such a good team. I'm me and he's like a 6'5" bald Bosnian man from Queens. Like he's quite physically intimidating. He's a softie deep down, but like, people don't react to him the same way that they react to me. And, I'm very friendly and warm. And I think that allows not just access to people in terms of what they tell me, but also just access, like, I get invited to places. I'll find myself in scenarios that, great stories that, they just are happy for me to be there. So I think realizing the power of vulnerability, to borrow the words of Brene Brown. And I think for a long time, especially as a woman, I grew up playing rugby. I am in a male-dominated field. I'm in war. Like, I think there's often this idea, this pressure maybe, or I felt like I had to like sort of play macho in a way, right? Like prove that I can be there and like that I'm strong and all that. But actually, I think I've proved that just by being there. But it's the vulnerability and the warmth that really sets me apart and allows me to tell different stories.
Yeah. I believe if you're being genuine, it will draw people in, Mm-hmm. And I guess journalist has that value, has that character, right? Yeah, especially when you're like not only there for the story, but you really genuinely want to be friends with them, make connections. I think people will open up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, not all. There's so many different types of journalism. There's a lot of types of journalism that, I'm not suited to. Like if you want someone to give you like a minute by minute analysis of what territory is being taken or what tanks and bullets and ammo are being shuttled around, like I'm not the person to ask. But, like I think realizing my strengths and not being bothered too much about my weaknesses. I think that's part of growing up too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So now you're focusing back to school, right? Because you love to study. So what is your dissertation about? And what is your plan after school?
Great question. Both great questions. So my dissertation, I think, hopefully none of my professors are watching this. I'm writing my dissertation on media narratives about manta ray conservation. So actually very relevant to Indonesia. So I'm looking at how the media shaped certain narratives about manta ray conservation and how those in turn actually affected manta ray conservation. Very different from Ukraine. It's hard for me to switch back and forth.
Very different.
I am not doing it successfully at the moment, to be honest. But I will need to get it done because I just need to do it. It's a topic I'm really interested in that I think is really important. And I love the ocean. And as a journalist, with my background, I felt like that was where I could have a contribution to conservation, was examining the media's role in all this. And what am I going to do after I'm done, whenever that is I honestly just keep doing what I'm doing. I think finishing this Ukraine project, whenever that might be. Right now, I'm pretty committed to covering the war for however long it lasts. We all hope that's not long at all. And then actually, I'll be able to focus on manta rays as well, because beyond the dissertation, I also have a grant from National Geographic to do a project about more or less the same topic with manta rays. So after Ukraine, it will be manta rays. And just hopefully keep telling the stories that I care about, whether that's about marine conservation or conflict, and sometimes conflict and conservation, oftentimes conflict and conservation overlap. So hopefully just being able to keep telling stories that I care about and that hopefully have impact. That is the plan.
Yeah, I think you're very fortunate to do that, doing something that you're passionate about and then you make a profession out of it. That's a huge bonus, right? So tell me, you had a tattoo, a very fresh one.
Very fresh. It's like I just got it finished. I finished on Sunday and it's Wednesday. So it's only This is the first day without bandages. Yeah.
Oh, so what is it about? Tell us the story about this. And then are you going to do like the whole arm thing?
Well, I originally just wanted like one like this big. And then now that I have this, I'm like, I should have just gone for the whole sleeve.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get used to this first. I'll let this heal. There's nothing like super significant about it. I didn't even see the sketch till the day of. That's how the artist works.
Wow.
Indeed. There's a leap of faith that I think totally paid off. This is an artist that I've been following for a while. I really love her work. Her name is Adriana Hello. You can find her on Instagram. I just really loved her work. I really loved what she stands for. She's a queer woman and she really advocates for tattooing color tattoos on darker skin, which I didn't realize this, but a lot of artists don't do because they think it doesn't work. And I loved her work, and I love beautiful tropical flowers. I think living in England, where I feel kind of out of place, and missing Asia, to be honest. Like I miss the tropics, and I realized like I just love having color and obviously nature in my life, and I wanted a bit of that on me. And she's based in New York, and she happened to be tattooing at a convention in Ireland. And I was like, yes, like I'm absolutely going to Ireland, way closer than New York. And like usually you have to book her out like a year in advance. So significance, I had made a board of different flowers that I Googled that, I was like, oh, like I should look up like flowers native to Hong Kong and flowers native to regions that are special to me. And in the end, I was like, meaning is subjective and constructed. And it's not like those flowers, even that are native to Hong Kong, it's not like I knew they existed before. So it's like, and a lot of flowers actually like they're cultivated and like kind of, don't necessarily exist in the wild and, are constructs in themselves. So I just wanted something that was colorful and vibrant and reminded me of like thriving and blossoming nature, and gave her some flowers that I liked, and she came up with this.
Yeah. You know what I think though, after this conversation and then looking at your tattoo, it's sort of like your life. You took a lot of leap of faith. It makes your life so colorful. Sometimes it can be thorny, sometimes it can be colorful and beautiful, but at the end of the day, it's life. And that's yours to share, right? So Laurel, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Thanks for letting me talk about myself for an hour. Next time we'll have to talk about you. Yeah.
One day. But I know your story will mean so much for the audience. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope to see you in person. Maybe in Rwanda.
Yes, me too. I hope so too. Maybe in Rwanda, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Care. Thank you. Bye.
Pasien-pasien dengan masalah mental health misalnya itu masih sering banget kan datang ke dokter gitu ya, malah dimarah-marahin karena tiba-tiba dokternya jadi ahli agama gitu di luar konteks kesehatan dan keahliannya dia sebagai dokter gitu kan. Mereka kalau ke poli HIV misalnya, yang antrinya kan di depan poli HIV itu kan nggak ada yang berani mbak duduk di depan antrian poli yang semua orang tahu itu poli HIV gitu.
Thank you for watching. This program is part of Cauldron Talks. Selain di YouTube, teman-teman bisa nonton di Facebook Watch dan dengarkan di Spotify atau Apple Podcast. Cari Cauldron Talks. If you enjoy it, please share with others.